Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 272 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to talk about micromanagement. Specifically, if you are tempted to micromanage your team, how do we put a stop to that? Because in my opinion, micromanagement is not something that anyone really wants to do, but we feel compelled to do it. So even good, thoughtful leaders can fall into that trap. And I've been tempted to micromanage myself in the past. So in this episode, we'll talk about how to get that out of your system and hopefully work a little bit better. So let's get into this topic right now. Micromanagement is a common challenge in many workplaces, and I often see posts on social media saying things like, "Stop micromanaging your team." Now, the reality is that if micromanagement was that simple to stop, it wouldn't be happening at all. It's the equivalent of telling someone to stop worrying or stop eating junk food. These statements are not really helpful because there are problems underneath the surface that tend to cause the micromanaging behavior. So it's much more complicated than just telling someone to stop. Now, you might be wondering why this is a topic in my podcast. After all, I generally don't write posts targeted at, bad leadership characteristics or qualities because the people listening to this podcast aren't usually those bad leaders. But here's the thing about this micromanagement topic. It's not about being a bad leader. Even good leaders can be tempted to micromanage from time to time, and that's why I'm doing this episode. So in this episode, I'm going to take a look at some of the potential causes behind being a micromanaging boss, the problems that come with it, and then some steps to try to take to fix the problem. Now, if you think I can help you with your leadership challenges, you can contact me to organise a free consultation where we can talk about the possibility of coaching and working together in that way. And hopefully we can work out whether we're a good fit. So if you're interested in a free 30-minute consultation, get in touch. The link will be on the show notes page to apply for that session. Okay, let's get into it. So first, let's take a look at the potential causes of micromanaging behavior. Now, if you've read any previous articles or listened to previous podcast episodes, you'll know that I really like the iceberg model of human behavior. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes page. By the way, that show notes page is thoughtfulleader.com/272 for this episode. Now, this model says that there are things above the waterline that we can easily observe about people. For example, what is their appearance, what they do, what body language they show. But this is only a small part of the bigger picture. Beneath the waterline, there are many more factors at play, such as their emotions, their beliefs, motivations, their culture, their health, any stresses and fears. And that's just to name a few factors. So all of those things are things we can't see. So with this in mind, we can start to see that micromanaging behavior is what we can observe. That's the things above the waterline. But there's more going on beneath the surface that is actually driving this behavior. So what I'm saying is, the micromanaging boss is not necessarily an evil, malicious, nasty person. And if you've been tempted to micromanage, then you'll know what I'm talking about. So let's look at some of the potential causes of micromanaging behavior. Now, I've been tempted myself to micromanage sometimes, and I've also worked with coaching clients that have struggled with the same temptation. So here are some of the common causes I've found that may drive micromanaging behavior. Now, the first one is fear. If a leader is scared of something going wrong, they'll be tempted to take control rather than give people more space. I also find ambition can be a factor. An extremely ambitious leader can feel greater pressure to succeed, which can give rise to greater fears about failure. The solution for them is sometimes to micromanage their teams. Also, pressure is a factor. When a leader is feeling pressure from an important client or stakeholder, they can be tempted to micromanage to make sure they get the outcome they need. And once again, you can see so far that they're all related to this fear response. Then there's insecurity. Sometimes a leader simply feels insecure about their capability. The response to this can sometimes be to show people who is the boss around here by exerting tight control over their team. There can also be discomfort with higher level thinking. Now, sometimes leaders are uncomfortable thinking or operating at a higher level doing things such as strategic planning or thinking. And the result? They consume themselves in the technical details, so they don't have time to do anything else, which means they might get thoroughly involved in the work of the team rather than doing the higher level leadership tasks. And the last factor I see sometimes causing this micromanaging behavior is past experience. We all learn from our role models, and what happens if your role model was actually a micromanager? You may feel that this is the way that leadership works and how things get done. And as you can see, these are just a few potential causes. Now, none of them are because the leader is broken or psychopathic. While these leaders do exist, I believe that the common causes I've just gone through are more likely to be the reason behind micromanaging behavior. So, if you are a micromanaging boss or you feel tempted to take a micromanagement approach from time to time, don't worry, you're not broken, you're just human. But having said that, micromanagement is not a good thing to be doing, so it's time to make a change, and let's look at how we can do that. So we've looked at some of the causes. Now, let's look at some of the common problems with being a micromanaging boss, and some of these might be obvious, other ones, might be something you haven't thought about before. So the first one is a micromanaging boss reduces autonomy. So giving people autonomy is a great way to motivate people. When your team feels that they have control over the work that they do and how they do it, they feel that you trust them. Now, micromanagement stops autonomy because a micromanaging boss will closely monitor the actions of their team to the point where people have no control over their own work. They simply sit there and follow instructions that you give to them. Now, when someone has no autonomy, they start to feel undervalued because their talents and abilities aren't being used effectively. They aren't able to make decisions for themselves, so they aren't bringing anything of themselves to the role. In this situation, people will quickly lose motivation. And you can go back to episode 232 about trying to give your team more autonomy and watching out for a few traps. That's a good one to listen to. Now, the second factor, or the second issue with a micromanaging boss is that you have less free time. Now, have you ever micromanaged anyone? I have actually done that, and it's definitely not my preferred style, but on a few rare occasions, I had a lack of trust in certain team members, and I felt like I needed to make sure they didn't break anything. Now, even though you are stopping somebody from going off course, you are actually spending a lot of time in the process. Now, the third issue is that a micromanaging boss can damage team trust. Sometimes our micromanaging behavior is focused on certain people who we don't trust to do the job well. But this might mean you are spending all your effort trying to manage a single person and spending no time with the people who you do trust. And now that seems like the opposite of the way it should be. Now, in this situation, what you really have is a performance issue that needs to be addressed. Micromanagement won't fix the issue, it will simply control it for a little while. And eventually, when you don't have the time to micromanage, there will be another problem. So in other words, micromanagement is not a sustainable approach when you're leading people. You may think you're reducing your risk by micromanaging someone, but actually you're increasing your risk by focusing too much on a single person and not being available to support the rest of your team. And one of the last issues I see here is that a micromanaging person needs to know all the answers. Now, when you're micromanaging, you're actually more likely to be telling people what to do all the time. You're paying close attention, checking and rechecking the work that's being done. Now, one problem with this approach is that you need to know all the answers, otherwise you can't check the work properly. Now, this sounds like a pretty big risk to me. If you need to know everything, you're not using the skills of your team, and you're also having to make sure you are up to date with all the latest trends and techniques. Or if you're not up to date, you could be stuck doing things the way we've always done them, which is not great either, is it? Now let's look at how to reduce your micromanaging tendencies or that temptation to micromanage. And being able to stop micromanaging your team can be difficult because you might have built up a bit of a habit where you feel like you need to do that. So part of the challenge is learning to let go so you can be a more effective leader. Now, the first thing to do is to find the reasons for your behavior. Now, one of the first things you should ask yourself is, what specifically is it that makes me feel like I need to micromanage my team? The cause is often that you don't trust members of your team. After all, if you trusted them, why would you need to keep track of everything? Now, where is this trust issue coming from? Is it because someone made a mistake that had bad consequences? Is it because a piece of work was submitted that had lots of errors? When you've pinpointed the event or events that started the micromanagement, you can go deeper and find the root cause. Now, why did this occur? Do you have the wrong people in your team for the work you do? The wrong skills or experience? Does your team need some training so they understand how to do their work better? Or do you just need to reduce your standards slightly? Digging deeper will hopefully help you find something that you can actually take action on. An approach that can help with this is the 5 whys technique, which you can read about at the link in the show notes page about 5 whys. This helps you understand the root cause. Now, without understanding the root cause, it will be very difficult to be able to take specific actions to help the situation. The second thing I recommend is to record the times when you feel the most tempted to micromanage. So sometimes micromanagement is situational. It could be that you are only focusing on a certain individual, or your temptation only arises in a specific situation. One thing I suggest for some of my coaching clients is to start recording when they feel the temptation to micromanage. This might be simply jotting it down in a notebook or taking a note on their phone or laptop. Over time, you'll be able to see the situations when you slip into the micromanaging boss habit, which will raise your awareness of your own behavior. And once you're aware, you have the best chance of showing restraint. And a tool that I strongly recommend for being able to spot patterns in your leadership is the Useful Thinking Journal, which I released last year in 2024. So I highly recommend you pick that up. It is a great way to practice structured reflection and actually identify patterns in your leadership and also take action to make improvements. Now, you can get that on the show notes page as well, thoughtfulleader.com/272. Another thing I'd suggest is to stop micromanaging by actually letting people fail. Maybe you started micromanaging because your team member was performing badly. On the one hand, you have prevented issues occurring by watching their work more closely. On the other hand, though, you are now spending all your time on the problem instead of focusing your efforts elsewhere. Now, if you don't solve it, this situation can go on forever. You aren't letting the poor performer fail anymore, you are simply propping them up. So if you aren't going to fire them, you're going to have to continue your close monitoring of the situation, leaving you no time for anything else. Sometimes it might be best to let them fail because that's how they learn to take accountability and improve, and it's a way you can provide them with feedback based on the evidence that you see from that failure. However, obviously this isn't easy. It can be very stressful if you're worried about people making mistakes. So what I would suggest in this case is to make sure your key stakeholders are informed about the situation. For example, you could tell your boss or peer managers that you are trying to help your team become more proactive and giving them more autonomy. The result could be that standards might drop a little in the short term while they get used to it. So communicating this possibility upfront to your important stakeholders can be one way to reduce the risk of problems if something does go wrong and to stop it being a huge surprise for everybody. So if you've developed a micromanagement habit, it can take some time to unwind. So take it slow, identify the real reasons behind your behavior, and you'll hopefully be able to make some incremental progress and start letting go. Spending all your days controlling someone takes time away from coaching, mentoring, and leading, which is actually what leaders are meant to be doing. So I'm interested in your response here. Have you ever felt the need to micromanage someone? What was the reason? Let me and all the other Thoughtful Leaders know in the comments on the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/272. And if you can spare a minute, I would love it if you could leave a positive review for this podcast, if you like it, of course, on your podcast app of choice. Helps me get the word out about the podcast and get more people engaged in thoughtful leadership. Thank you in advance. Okay, I appreciate you listening to this episode. Hopefully you can kick that micromanagement habit if you have one, and I'll see you next time.